بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والحمد لله رب العالمين، ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، ونشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله خاتم الأنبياء والرسل أجمعين، المرسل رحمة للعالمين. سبحان الله، سبحانه، نؤمن به ونستعينه ونستهديه ونستنصره ونستجيره، فإنه حق من هدى الله فلا مضل له، ومن يضلله فلا هادي له. ونتبتل إلى الله ونقول: اللهم اصلح لنا ديننا الذي هو عصمة أمرنا، واصلح لنا دنيانا التي فيها معاشنا، واصلح لنا آخرتنا التي فيها معادنا، واجعل الحياة زيادة لنا في كل خير، واجعل الموت راحة لنا من كل شر، يا الله يا رب العالمين. وصلي وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وعلى أصحابه وعلى من اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. سبحان الله، so often as major world events unfold, the simple reality is that as these world events unfold and you witness human beings engaged in minor and major challenges, for a Muslim, what ought to be, what should be the reality is the constant and persistent voice of the Quran, reminding, alerting, provoking. The voice of the Quran because it is the very agency of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the very agency of God in our living reality. Look at the simple challenge in Surah Al-Shams, when Allah reminds us of that nafs that Allah has created. And Allah quite simply tells us, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. Allah reminds us of the reality of fujur and taqwa. Taqwa is not just to refrain from sin, but ittaqa'illah or taqwa is to be God conscious in all of your affairs. Taqwa is to internalize the reality that you are but created, not an agent of yourself, but an agent by your Maker, for your Maker. Taqwa is to understand that yourself, that self is not yours. The force of your thoughts are not yours. You are not free to serve the demonic with your thinking, but you are also not free to serve yourself with your thinking. Taqwa is to realize that that intellect that Allah has given you is to be used to fulfill the objectives of the divine on Allah's earth. But not only your intellect and your ideas and your thought, but even your heart. Taqwa, as the Prophet ﷺ time and time again taught, is for your hawa to become consistent with Allah's will. For what you perceive yourself to be entitled to, your perception of what you deserve, or what you should have, or what is justly yours, to be consistent with godliness, not selfishness. So, those who have taqwa, as Allah reminds us in these simple, straightforward words, the material effect of this taqwa has to have a tangible reality. And that tangible reality is zakaha, to purify the self, to emerge with the self from a state of debase, to emerge with the self from a state of debase. Debase is everything that is lowly, self-centered, selfish, treacherous, untrue. Allah challenges us by telling us, I've given you the self. What are you going to do with it? Are you really going to rise to the challenge of real taqwa, the real sense of taqwa? Purifying the self, or are you going to debase it by relegating it to everything that is ungodly? You want to understand the godly. Well, the first thing about al-Rabbaniyya, the first thing about godliness, I could tell you that Allah is beautiful. But sadly for modern Muslims, it seems like they cannot comprehend an abstract concept like beauty. And it seems like it doesn't resonate within them. So let me tell you a truth about al-Rabbaniyya, about your God. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not labor us with the obligation to understand Allah, because Allah is giving to the extreme. To put it in simple human terms, nothing Allah has taught us, nothing Allah has revealed to us, indeed nothing that Allah has created is for the benefit of Allah, Allah's self. Allah didn't even say, occupy yourself with understanding me. Allah said, occupy yourself with using what I have given you justly and fairly. So, the most basic thing about purifying the self, the most basic thing about being a godly human being, is to live beyond the self, to imitate your Lord, to live in the Sunnah of your Lord, to give, to live to give, just like your Lord. Imagine if your life as a Muslim was not about, look at me, understand me, feel me, me. Do you appreciate me? Do you like me? Do you this me? Do you that me? Imagine if your life as a Muslim was actually according to the Sunnah of your Maker. I give. I exist because this world is not the goal, the purpose, the ultimate. And because nothing I own is mine. And because the intellect and the self and the emotions are all Allah's. And I use them to honor what Allah has given, so that I use what Allah has given justly and fairly. What a different ummah we would be. قد أفلح من زكاها وقد خاب من دساها. الدسيسة. Imagine a human being who is dassas. Even that expression. A human being who is dassas is a human being that lives life to talk about people. All they live for is who did this, who said that, how did what this person affect me, make me feel, what can I do, what I've done, stories upon stories upon stories, what we call gossip. A lowly human being. A human being hardly with a vestige of divinity. The light of divinity within has dissipated and disappeared. They live for nothing but their own career, what we call career. They live for nothing but how am I going to look? How do I look? What do people think of me? What do people say about me? How do people treat me? Me, me, me. قد أفلح من زكاها وقد خاب من دساها. Not a glimmer of divinity in the dassas, in the abasement of the self, because they do not imitate or replicate or in any way honor what the divine is within. Our ummah is challenged, but the longer I remain on this earth, the more I realize that it is not the fancy theoretical constructs I've read in books. It is not the flowery, eloquent language and conceptualizations and categorizations and distinctions and qualifications and supra-qualifications on the qualifications of intellectuals. The longer I remain on this earth, the more the glamour of all of that seems to fade away, the more that I realize the plight of our ummah is really the individual. We are a selfish people. We are raised to be a selfish people. We are a people that rarely live beyond ourselves. We are born as if breastfed the milk of hypocrisy. We are born to talk about Allah and piety and being a good Muslim, but we insult Allah in every minute of every day in our life. We insult Allah because we construct Allah as if Allah really cares about whether we correctly perform this or correctly perform that, about whether we rush through 5 prayers a day while our mind is somewhere else actually matters to Allah. We don't understand our God. We don't understand our Quran. We don't care to understand our God. And we don't care to understand our Quran. And for whatever reason, every individual Muslim seems to think that they are God's gift to the universe. That the world starts with their emotions and ends with their emotions. And they live and die making very little difference in the world they lived in. The more I remain on the face of this earth, I realize that the plight of the Muslim starts and ends with each individual Muslim. There is a deep flaw in the way we understand our religion. We take from our religion what boosts our egos, what makes us feel special, exceptional. But we leave out of our religion everything that is summed up with, do you purify or do you debase? When you wake up in the morning, are the sum total of your thoughts by the time you go to bed, are the sum total of your thoughts and feelings about serving Allah's purposes, serving others, or about you? Who made you feel happy? Who disappointed you? Who promoted you? Who praised you? Who served you? It is not the grand theories. It is not the obfuscations of academia and the obscurities, often fancy words, camouflage, hypocritical hearts. Often, the eloquence of scholars often camouflages a deep-seated hypocrisy and ailment of the soul. Look at our Ummah. Look at our Ummah. Whatever we thought would work has not been working. And inshallah, in the second khutbah, I will show you precisely how it's not been working. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم واسأل الله يستجب لكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وسبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آله الميامين وعلى أصحابه الطيبين وعلى من اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. The world witnesses a new war that breaks out in Europe. Russia invades Ukraine. There's so much that one can say, but I'm going to focus on one thing. What struck me about this is the language that you hear from every side and angle about Ukrainian casualties, Ukrainian life, Ukrainian spirit. You can tell just from the language being used that the people who are invaded and the people who are being dominated are a white people. Because no one in the invasion of Iraq or the invasion of Afghanistan spoke in lofty terms about how the Iraqi people love their country or the Afghani people love their country and that they will resist and that they will resist bravely and heroically. The language that is being used about Ukraine is, of course, and justly and fairly, how they are a heroic people who hate domination and who will fight for their freedom. But it's a very different language than that is used about Yemenis, about Iraqis, about Afghanis. And at the same time that we have this very much racialized reality going on, you gaze upon the face of our Ummah, and what meets you? I've mentioned before that Amnesty International came out with an important report. That report documented how Israel is an apartheid state. And of course, the White House completely ignored the report. And of course, the LA Times, the Washington Post, the New York Times completely ignored the report. Not only that, but it becomes clear that these newspapers not only avoid the word apartheid about Israel, but they even avoid the word Palestine. The reality that we live in how many Muslims who sit there and spend and waste hours on social media pontificating and spewing nonsense? How many Muslims who sit there and talk about their feelings day and night and what bothered them and what hurt them and what annoyed them and what irritated them have actually read the Amnesty International report or even really cared? How many Muslims know that just a day ago, Israel again killed Muhammad Shahada, a 13-year-old. Israel shot the child in the stomach. And when he dropped to the ground, Israeli soldiers would not allow ambulances to reach the body for half an hour until the child died. And then Israeli soldiers abused the father who arrived on the scene. But wait, of course, this is not the first or the second child to be shot by Israel in 2022. And indeed, in 2021, Israel killed 78 Palestinian children in occupied territory. For all those Muslims who spend time yapping about their feelings and who irritated them and who annoyed them, how much time have you spent thinking about these children in the apartheid state of Israel? How invested is your life about anything beyond yourself? I'm sure we all heard about how various states in India have banned the hijab. The school districts that instituted the hijab ban in India did so 3 months before the start of exams. So effectively, is through and through disaster for Muslim women who are trying to get an education, who have to choose either to take off the hijab or to forgo their dreams at being an educated Muslim woman. I've been following the reports, and you know, it's not just that school districts are banning the hijab and denying Muslim women the right to an education, but even banks have started denying Muslim women wearing the hijab service. Bank tellers telling Muslim women, we can't withdraw money or do whatever business you have until you take off your hijab. But then I read that alongside this, a very disturbing that Hindu extremists start doing mock auctions on the killing and raping of Muslim women. As the clear signs of a threat of genocide escalate in India, as the physical assaults against Muslims, plus the banning of hijab. Actually, before I get there, pause with the banning of hijab thing. How many sit there and talk about how the Taliban, who can't feed their people, have denied women the right to an education? And sure, it is disgusting that they would deny women the right to an education. But how many have talked about how it is similarly disgusting that Hindus are denying Muslim women the right to an education? Instead of being preoccupied with yourself, have you thought beyond the self? Have you even obligated the self to live the trauma of your fellow Muslim? If you can't do anything else, can you even just share their reality, their agony, their pain? Maybe eventually you will get sick of feeling miserable and wake up to do something about it. You see, your government, recently, the US Commission for Religious Freedom wanted to list India as a systematic abuser of the right to religious freedom. The Biden administration rejected. The Biden administration refused to list India as a country that consistently and systematically denies Muslims their religious freedoms. Although at this point it is undeniable. Congress is horrifically silent about the persecution of Muslims in India. The world is shockingly silent about how Muslim women are being denied the right to education. When the Taliban do it, it's a sign of how retarded and backwards Muslims are. But when the Hindus do it to Muslims, well, you know. Even when Muslim women attempted to protest the hijab bans, they were assaulted by Hindu nationalists. Hindus organized counter demonstrations and attacked and assaulted these Muslim women. And not only is the world silent, but even more than that. Remember that the Prime Minister of India, Modi, before he came to power, was responsible for the murder of 2,000 Muslims. Well, since he's come to power, just last week, 51 Muslims were killed by Hindu extremists, and the world is silent. But since he's come to power, hundreds more Muslims have been killed, assaulted, beaten, Muslim women raped. And not only is the American government silent, but come to our favorite. Saudi Arabia, a few months ago, signed an investment agreement with the Indian government to invest billions of dollars in occupied Kashmir that India has annexed. In fact, MBS snubbed the Pakistani president in an incident, in an event that's quite well known, and signed agreements with Modi's government to invest billions of dollars in annexed Kashmir. And when asked about India's abysmal human rights record in Kashmir, the guardian of the two holy sites said that's an internal Indian matter. But it doesn't stop there. India and the United Arab Emirates signed a major investment pact over $100 billion to be invested by the Emirates in India. Do you see how it works? Do you see how it works? How can non-Muslims stop racializing Muslims? Stop devaluing Muslim life? If everything, do you know that recently one of the biggest human rights issues is that human rights organizations are appealing and begging the Egyptian and the Saudi and the Emirati governments to try to stop turning in Uyghur Muslims to China. We are begging them because every time they capture a Uyghur Muslim, even if they stop in Saudi Arabia on Hajj or Umrah, they turn them over to the Chinese government. But we have a systematic and real problem. There is a figure who's quite well known in the Muslim world, at least in the Arabic-speaking world. A fellow called Adnan Ibrahim. Adnan Ibrahim became very famous about 10 years ago because Adnan Ibrahim, like Hassan Farhat al-Malki, developed a sustained critique tracing the origins of despotic, autocratic, authoritarian thinking in the Muslim world. Like Hassan Farhan al-Malki, Adnan Ibrahim emerged on the scene talking about at what point in their history Muslims have learned to be so unethical. But unlike Hassan Farhat al-Malki, Hassan Farhan al-Malki ended up in prison and continues to be in prison. Adnan Ibrahim, a couple of years ago, well, 2018, shocked all his followers by suddenly praising in ridiculously lofty language MBS, the Saudi government, and yes, the Emirati government. You fill in the blanks. First, the Saudi government gave him a TV program in Saudi Arabia. And after broadcasting for a period, they stopped the program and banned him from entering Saudi Arabia. The Emirati government did the same. They give him a TV program for a short period of time and then stopped it and banned him from entering the Emirat, or supposedly, or that's what's being said. Or that's at least what Adnan Ibrahim said. But one clear thing is that Adnan Ibrahim of 10 years ago, who used to talk about issues of justice, democracy, immorality, unethical thinking, despotism, is no more. What he talks about these days is completely different. My point is, individual morality. The Emirat decides, and not decides, but the Emirat betrays Muslims every single day. Betrayed Muslims with the Arab revolutions. Betrayed Muslims in Libya. Betrayed Muslims in Yemen. Betrayed Muslims in Somalia. Betrayed Muslims in Egypt. Betrayed Muslims in China. Betrayed Muslims with India. And yet, all types of scholars have sold themselves to Emirati money. And you, as individual Muslims, continue to give legitimacy and validity to the scholars who sold themselves to the Emirat. You make the individual decision every day in your life to tell them, we're not mad at you because you sold yourself to the Emirat. Although we know you never speak against anything the Emirat does. The Emirat has promised Israel with major new investments despite the 78 Palestinian children killed, despite the apartheid regime, despite the 13-year-old that was just killed a couple of days ago. The Emirat doesn't care. The Saudi Arabia doesn't care. Egypt doesn't care. And when you validate the scholars that continue to sell themselves to the Egyptian government, the Saudi government, the Emirati government, you don't care. Don't kid yourself. The longer I remain on this earth, the more I hear the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. قد أفلح من زكاها وقد خاب من دساها. قد أفلح من زكاها. That who purifies the soul, purifies it how? How? By not being so selfish, so egocentric, by not being a whiner, a person who lives to whine, but do nothing. وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. دَسَّاهَا how? By being a human being who doesn't matter, who doesn't take a position, whose only position is I care about my feelings, I care about my emotions, I care about me, I care about my career, I care about how I look, I care, I. Remember, grand theories and eloquent words are a very good camouflage for the ailments and the hypocrisies of the soul. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم إني داع فأمنوا. اللهم اعف عنا، اللهم اغفر لنا، اللهم ارحمنا يا علي يا عظيم، اللهم اهدنا لأقرب من هذا رشدا يا رب العالمين. Allah forgive our sins. Allah inspire us to elevate ourselves. Allah help us not to be among those who debase themselves. Allah help us to be better Muslims, to be godly Muslims, to be beautiful Muslims. وصلي وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه واتبعوا بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وأقم الصلاة.